The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the dining room as family members gathered around the large oak table. Laughter echoed through the house, mixing with the clinking of glasses and plates. To anyone looking from the outside, it seemed like the perfect family dinner. But appearances could be deceiving. I sat quietly near the end of the table, the same seat I had occupied for years. Not because I liked it there, but because nobody else wanted it. It was the place farthest from the conversation, farthest from attention, and somehow it had become my permanent spot. Across from me sat my older brother, Ethan. He was the golden child. Everything he did was celebrated. If he closed a small business deal, my parents talked about it for weeks. If he made a mistake, they quickly found excuses for him. Next to him sat my younger sister, Chloe. She was my mother's favorite. She could do no wrong in her eyes. Then there was me. The forgotten child. The backup plan nobody planned to use. For years, I had convinced myself it didn't bother me. I focused on school, work, and building my future. I told myself I didn't need their approval. But deep down, a small part of me still hoped things would change. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight they would finally see me. My Aunt Karan smiled as she looked around the table. "You should be proud," she said to my parents. "You raised wonderful children." For a moment, I actually felt hopeful. Then my mother laughed. Not a warm laugh. A cold one. "Well," she said, taking a sip of wine, "not all of them." The room immediately became quieter. Something in my stomach tightened. I knew exactly where this was going. My aunt looked confused. "What do you mean?" My mother glanced directly at me. The look on her face wasn't angry. It was worse. It was dismissive. Like I wasn't even important enough to dislike. She pointed her fork toward me. "Him." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My mother continued. "Ethan helps run the family business. Chloe is always there when we need her. But him?" She shrugged. "Honestly, nobody needs him." The words landed like a hammer. Nobody needs him. For a second, I thought I had heard wrong. Surely no mother would say that about her own child. But then my father nodded. And everything became real. "Your mother isn't wrong," he said casually. "He's always been different. If he disappeared tomorrow, life would pretty much stay the same." A few nervous laughs spread around the table. Nobody knew how to react. My cousins stared down at their plates. My aunt's smile vanished. Even Ethan looked uncomfortable. But nobody said anything. Nobody defended me. Nobody told them to stop. I felt my face grow warm. My chest tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to yell. I wanted to ask what I had done to deserve this. But years of disappointment had taught me something important. Arguing with people who had already decided your worth was pointless. So instead, I smiled. A small smile. A calm smile. The kind that confused people. My mother frowned. "What are you smiling about?" I looked at her. Years ago, that question would have hurt me. Tonight, it didn't. Because unlike everyone at that table, I knew something they didn't. I had spent the last 4 years building a life in secret. While they ignored me, I learned. While they criticized me, I worked. While they dismissed me, I prepared. Every night after work, I sat in my room studying business, marketing, and technology. Every weekend, while they attended family events without inviting me, I built something bigger than their approval. Something they couldn't take away. And suddenly, sitting there at that dinner table, I realized something. I didn't need them anymore. The realization was strangely peaceful. My father continued talking as if nothing had happened. The conversation shifted. People laughed again. Dinner continued. But for me, everything had changed. I looked around the room one last time. At the family photos hanging on the wall. At the memories that never really felt like mine. At the people I had spent years trying to impress. And I felt something unexpected. Not sadness. Not anger. Relief. Because for the first time in my life, I stopped waiting for them to become different people. The truth was simple. If they couldn't see my value by now, they never would. After dinner ended, everyone slowly left. My relatives hugged each other goodbye. Cars pulled out of the driveway. The house became quiet. I walked upstairs to my room and closed the door behind me. Then I opened my laptop. On the screen was something my family had never bothered to ask about. My company. My business accounts. My growing client list. The future I had built completely on my own. I stared at the numbers for a long moment. Then I made a decision. A decision that would change everything. I opened an apartment listing website. Within an hour, I had scheduled a viewing. Within a week, I would move out. Within a month, I would be gone. And the people who said nobody needed me would finally discover something ironic. The person they valued the least was about to become the most successful member of the family. I leaned back in my chair and smiled again. This time, for real. Because the greatest revenge wasn't going to be proving them wrong. It was going to be succeeding without them. And my story was only beginning. The morning after the dinner felt strangely peaceful. For years, I had woken up hoping my family would finally see me differently. Hoping my parents would notice my efforts. Hoping they would someday tell me they were proud of me. But after hearing the words "nobody needs you," something inside me had changed. The hope was gone. And honestly, it felt like freedom. I got out of bed, made coffee, and opened my laptop. Unlike my family, my laptop never judged me. It only reflected the work I had put in. Emails filled my inbox. Client requests. Meeting confirmations. Business updates. The company I had secretly built was growing faster than ever. Nobody in my family knew the truth. To them, I was still the quiet son who spent too much time staring at a screen. If only they knew. 4 years earlier, while Ethan was being praised for helping in my father's business, I had been teaching myself coding through free online courses. Every night after work, I stayed awake until 2 or 3 in the morning learning skills nobody around me understood. Website design. Digital marketing. Sales strategies. Business management. There were nights when I wanted to quit. Nights when I felt exhausted. Nights when I questioned whether all the effort would ever pay off. But every time someone underestimated me, it gave me fuel. Every criticism became motivation. Every insult became energy. And little by little, my side projects began making money. At first it was only a few dollars. Then a few hundred. Then thousands. Soon I was earning more than many people my age. Still, I told nobody. Not because I wanted to hide. Because nobody cared enough to ask. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. Pick up milk on your way home. Not hello. Not how are you. Not an apology for what happened at dinner. Just a request. Like I was an employee. I stared at the message for several seconds before putting my phone down. That was the moment I made my final decision. I was leaving. Not someday. Not next year. Now. That afternoon, I visited the apartment I had found online. The building stood in the heart of downtown. Modern. Quiet. Clean. The moment I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. Large windows overlooked the city skyline. Sunlight poured into the living room. The space wasn't huge. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I could imagine a future that didn't revolve around trying to earn someone's approval. The leasing agent smiled. What do you think? I smiled back. I'll take it. A week later, I started packing. Nobody noticed. At first. My room had always been isolated from the rest of the house. People rarely came inside. When moving day arrived, I rented a truck and loaded my belongings. Laptop. Desk. Clothes. Books. Everything I truly cared about fit into a few boxes. My father walked into the driveway just as I was closing the truck. He looked surprised. What are you doing? I'm moving out. His expression barely changed. Oh. That was it. Just oh. No questions. No concern. No sadness. Nothing. My mother came outside moments later. Instead of asking why I was leaving, she crossed her arms. Finally. I raised an eyebrow. What? It's about time you started acting like an adult. The irony almost made me laugh. Acting like an adult? I had been paying my own expenses for years. I had built a successful business without help. I was financially independent. Yet somehow, in their eyes, I was still the failure. I simply nodded. Take care. Then I got into the truck. Neither of them stopped me. Neither of them hugged me. Neither of them said they would miss me. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. My parents stood in the driveway watching. The house slowly disappeared behind me. And with it disappeared years of disappointment. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. 3 months later, everything changed. My company landed its biggest client yet. A national retail brand. The contract was worth more money than my father earned in several years. When I received the signed agreement, I sat silently in my office. Not because I was shocked. Because I was remembering that dinner. Nobody needs you. The words echoed in my mind. I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge. Because those words no longer had power over me. Success wasn't making me happy because it proved them wrong. It made me happy because it proved I had been right to believe in myself. Outside my office window, the city lights began to glow as evening approached. My phone remained silent. No calls from family. No messages asking how I was doing. And for once, that didn't bother me. Because I finally understood something important. Some people only see your value after the world recognizes it. But your value exists long before they notice. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the skyline. The life they said would never matter was becoming extraordinary. And they still had no idea. To be continued? 2 years passed. In those 2 years, my life changed in ways I could never have imagined. The small business I had started from my bedroom was no longer small. What began as a freelance side project had grown into a full digital marketing agency with dozens of employees and clients across the country. Every morning, I walked into my office building and saw people working hard because they believed in a vision I had created. A vision nobody in my family had ever believed in. Especially my parents. At first, success felt exciting. Then it became normal. The late nights. The business meetings. The endless phone calls. The pressure of managing a growing company. It wasn't easy. But unlike the pain of constantly seeking approval, this struggle actually led somewhere. Every challenge helped me grow. Every obstacle taught me something valuable. And every victory reminded me why I had left. One Monday morning, my assistant rushed into my office carrying a magazine. Her face was full of excitement. "You need to see this." I looked down at the cover. For a moment, I couldn't believe it. There I was. My picture covered the entire front page. Above it, a headline read, "The young entrepreneur who built an empire from nothing." I stared at it silently. The article detailed my journey. How I started with almost nothing. How I taught myself skills online. How I built a company without investors. How I created jobs and helped businesses grow. Reading it felt strange. Because while the world saw success, I remembered every lonely night that had led there. Every rejection. Every sacrifice. Every moment when nobody believed in me. Especially the people who should have believed first. By lunchtime, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Business partners. Old classmates. Former co-workers. Everyone wanted to congratulate me. Then a name appeared on my screen that I hadn't seen in months. Mom. I stared at the phone. The ringing continued. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part was curious. Finally, I answered. "Hello?" For a moment there was silence. Then my mother's voice came through. Warm. Friendlier than I remembered. "Sweetheart." I almost laughed. She hadn't called me sweetheart in years. "Yes?" "We just saw the magazine." I leaned back in my chair. I figured. "You never told us your company was this successful." There was a strange tone in her voice. Almost disappointed. As though I had hidden something from her. I smiled slightly. "You never asked." The silence that followed lasted several seconds. For the first time in my life, she didn't have an answer. A few minutes later, my father got on the phone. His voice sounded different too. Less confident. Less dismissive. "You've done well." 3 simple words. Words I had waited years to hear. Yet somehow they didn't feel as satisfying as I once imagined. Because they had arrived too late. Not too late for forgiveness. But too late to erase the past. "Thank you," I said politely. That evening another message arrived. "Family dinner this Sunday. Would love for you to come." I stared at the screen. The same people who barely noticed when I moved out now suddenly wanted family dinners. The same people who claimed nobody needed me now wanted my attention. Success had changed many things. But it hadn't changed my memory. Sunday arrived. I drove to my parents' house for the first time in nearly a year. Everything looked exactly the same. The same driveway. The same front porch. The same family photos hanging in the hallway. Yet somehow the house felt smaller. As if I had outgrown it. The moment I walked inside, everyone greeted me. My mother hugged me. My father shook my hand. My brother smiled. Even distant relatives seemed excited to see me. It was strange. Not long ago, I could sit in this house for hours without anyone speaking to me. Now everyone wanted a conversation. At dinner, the attention never stopped. Questions about my company. Questions about my income. Questions about my future plans. People listened carefully to every word I said. And suddenly I understood something important. They weren't listening because I had changed. They were listening because my status had changed. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me sad. Because every person deserves to be valued before they become successful. Not after. Halfway through dinner, my Aunt Karen smiled. "We're all proud of you." I thanked her. Then I noticed my mother watching me carefully. Almost nervously. Finally, she spoke. "You know." The room became quiet. "We may have underestimated you." Underestimated. An interesting choice of words. Not ignored. Not hurt. Not rejected. Just underestimated. I smiled politely. Maybe. Nobody mentioned that dinner from 2 years ago. Nobody mentioned the words that changed everything. But I remembered. And judging by the look in my parents' eyes, they remembered too. When dinner ended, my father walked me to my car. Before I got inside, he spoke quietly. "I hope you know we're proud of you." I looked at him for a moment. Then I nodded. "Thank you." And I meant it. But deep inside, I understood something that success had taught me. People often celebrate your victory after ignoring your struggle. They admire the destination without respecting the journey. The difference is important. As I drove away, city lights reflected across my windshield. My phone buzzed with new business opportunities. New clients. New possibilities. The future looked brighter than ever. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the story. Because for the first time in years, my family needed something from me. And soon, I would discover exactly what it was. 3 months after that family dinner, life was busier than ever. My company had expanded into 3 new cities. We had signed major contracts with national brands, hired dozens of employees, and moved into a larger office building downtown. Every day brought new opportunities. New challenges. New goals. For the first time in my life, I was completely focused on building the future I wanted. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't expected. "Dad." I answered after a few rings. "Hello?" His voice sounded different. Not confident. Not authoritative. Not like the man who had spent years acting as though he had all the answers. He sounded tired. "Can we talk?" I sat back in my chair. "Sure." There was a long pause. Then he said something I never thought I would hear. "I need your help." The words hung in the air. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My father had always been the strongest person in the room. The man who believed asking for help was weakness. The man who once told everyone at a family dinner that nobody needed me. And now he was calling because he needed me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "What happened?" I asked. His sigh was heavy. "The business." Immediately I understood. My father's company had been struggling for years. Competition had increased. Costs had risen. Several investments hadn't worked out. But according to family rumors, things were worse than anyone realized. "How bad is it?" I asked. Another pause. "Bad." That single word told me everything. We arranged to meet the following day. When I arrived at his office, I barely recognized the place. The building looked older. The parking lot was half empty. The energy that once filled the company was gone. Inside, employees moved quietly through the hallways. Many desks sat empty. Something was clearly wrong. My father greeted me in his office. For the first time in my life, he looked old. Not physically. Emotionally. The confidence that had always defined him seemed gone. He closed the door behind us. Then he handed me several financial reports. I spent the next hour reviewing everything. The situation was worse than I expected. Declining revenue. Poor investments. Growing debt. Several major clients had left. The company wasn't just struggling. It was close to collapse. When I finally looked up, my father avoided eye contact. I made mistakes. Hearing him admit that felt almost surreal. Growing up, he never admitted mistakes. Not to me. Not to anyone. But life had humbled him. And now he sat across from the son he once dismissed. Waiting. Hoping. Needing help. Part of me remembered every painful moment. Every criticism. Every insult. Every time he treated me like I wasn't important. I remembered that dinner. "Nobody needs him." The words echoed in my mind. For a brief moment, I imagined refusing. Walking away. Letting him experience the consequences alone. After all, hadn't he done the same to me? Wouldn't that be fair? Maybe. But fairness and wisdom aren't always the same thing. Because the truth was simple. If I chose revenge, nothing would improve. The past wouldn't change. The hurt wouldn't disappear. And I would become exactly the kind of person I never wanted to be. I closed the reports and looked at him. I'll help. His eyes widened. Really? I nodded. Yes. For several seconds, he simply stared at me. As if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Finally, he spoke. Why? It was a fair question. After everything that had happened, why would I help? I thought about my answer carefully. Then I said, because I don't want to measure someone's value the way you measured mine. The room became completely silent. My father's expression changed. For the first time, I could see genuine regret. Not embarrassment. Not guilt because he needed something. Real regret. The kind that comes when a person finally understands the damage they've caused. Over the next several months, I worked closely with his company. I introduced him to financial advisors. I helped restructure operations. I connected him with business partners who could stabilize cash flow. Slowly, things began improving. The debt became manageable. Clients started returning. Employee morale improved. The company wasn't saved overnight. But it was surviving. One evening after a long meeting, my father and I sat alone in his office. The sun was setting outside the window. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally broke the silence. I owe you an apology. I looked at him. He continued. For a lot of things. His voice cracked slightly. I spent years appreciating the wrong things. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was angry. Because I could see how difficult those words were for him. Eventually I nodded. I know. He looked down at his desk. When you were younger, I thought success only looked one way. What do you mean? He sighed. I thought Ethan would carry the family legacy. I thought Chloe would always stay close to us. And I never took the time to understand you. For years, I had dreamed about hearing those words. Yet now that they were finally spoken, they felt different than I expected. Less satisfying. More sad. Because some wounds don't disappear when someone apologizes. They simply stop growing. As I prepared to leave, my father stood up. Before I reached the door, he said something that stopped me. You were the strongest one all along. I turned toward him. His eyes were filled with emotion. And for the first time in my entire life, I believed he meant it. As I walked out of the building that evening, I realized something important. The greatest victory wasn't becoming successful. It wasn't proving people wrong. It wasn't making them regret their choices. The greatest victory was becoming someone who could choose kindness even when bitterness would have been easier. And although my family's story wasn't finished yet, for the first time, it was finally beginning to heal. 6 months passed after I helped save my father's company. Business was stable again. The debt had been reduced. Employees who once feared losing their jobs were finally optimistic about the future. For the first time in years, my father seemed at peace. And surprisingly, so was I. The anger I had carried for so long was gone. Not because I had forgotten what happened, but because I had stopped allowing the past to control my future. One Friday evening, my mother called. Her voice sounded unusually nervous. We're having a family dinner this Sunday. I smiled slightly. Another family dinner. The last one had changed my life forever. I'll be there, I said. When Sunday arrived, I drove to my parents' house as the sun began to set. The familiar driveway came into view. The same house. The same front porch. The same dining room waiting inside. Yet everything felt different. Years ago, I had walked through that door hoping to earn love and acceptance. Tonight, I walked in already knowing my worth. That made all the difference. The house was filled with family. My brother Ethan. My sister Chloe. My aunt Karan. Several cousins. Even relatives I hadn't seen in years. Everyone greeted me warmly. As I stepped into the dining room, memories rushed back. The long table. The chairs. The laughter. The exact spot where my mother had once pointed at me and said, "Nobody needs him." For a brief moment, I could almost hear the words again. But they no longer hurt. Because the person sitting at that table now wasn't the same person who had heard them years ago. Dinner began. Conversations flowed easily. People laughed. Stories were shared. For the first time in a long while, the atmosphere felt genuine. Not forced. Not awkward. Just family. Halfway through the meal, I noticed my parents exchanging nervous glances. Something was clearly on their minds. Finally, my mother stood up. The room grew quiet. Everyone looked toward her. She took a deep breath. Then another. When she spoke, her voice trembled. "I need to say something." The entire table fell silent. My mother looked directly at me. Her eyes were filled with emotion. The confident woman who once dismissed me now seemed vulnerable. "I've spent weeks thinking about what I wanted to say." She paused. "And honestly, there aren't enough words." The room remained silent. My father slowly stood beside her. My mother continued. "Years ago, we failed you." The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they hurt. Because they mattered. She wiped a tear from her eye. "We judged you without understanding you." My father nodded. "We overlooked your strengths." My mother looked down briefly before continuing. "And what we said at that dinner?" Her voice cracked. "It was cruel." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Every person at the table seemed frozen. For years I had imagined this moment. I had imagined anger. I had imagined satisfaction. I had imagined making them feel the same pain they gave me. But standing there, they looked nothing like villains. They looked human. Flawed. Regretful. Broken by their own mistakes. My father cleared his throat. "There isn't a day that goes by that I don't regret those words." The room became even quieter. Then he said something nobody expected. Including me. "When we said nobody needed you." He paused. "We were completely wrong." Tears filled my mother's eyes. "You became the person this family needed most." I looked around the table. Every face was watching. Waiting. For a response. For years, this was the moment I thought I wanted. The apology. The recognition. The admission that they were wrong. Yet standing there, I realized something surprising. Those things weren't what healed me. The healing had happened long before this dinner. It happened the day I stopped measuring my value through someone else's opinion. It happened the day I believed in myself. Slowly, I stood. My heart was calm. My voice steady. "I forgive you." My mother's shoulders immediately relaxed. My father closed his eyes for a moment. Relief filled the room. But I wasn't finished. I looked at everyone gathered around the table. Then I said, "For years, I thought success would be my revenge." Nobody spoke. I continued. "I thought becoming wealthy would prove something." I smiled. But I was wrong. Confused expressions appeared around the room. "The greatest revenge isn't making people regret hurting you." I looked at my parents. "It's building a life so meaningful that their rejection can no longer define you." Tears streamed down my mother's face. My father stared at the table. And for the first time, everyone truly understood. My success wasn't the company. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the magazine covers. It wasn't the recognition. My success was surviving the rejection without becoming bitter. It was choosing growth over resentment. Kindness over revenge. Purpose over pain. That was the real victory. A few moments later, my sister stood and hugged me. Then my brother. Then my parents. The room filled with emotion. For the first time in many years, we felt like a family. Not a perfect family, but a real one. Later that night, as I drove home, the city lights reflected across my windshield. I thought about the words that had once nearly broken me. "Nobody needs you." I smiled. Because now I knew the truth. The person who needed me most had always been me. The day I chose myself, everything changed. And in the end, that choice became the beginning of the life I was always meant to live. The end.